A wedding day in Judea, 30 AD, marriage in the time of Jesus was nothing like romance. "Mother, the wine!" The young bride's whisper cut through the courtyard noise, her hands trembling as she clutched her veil. Around her, oil lamps flickered against limestone walls still warm from the afternoon sun. Feet shuffled on packed earth. Someone laughed. The air smelled of roasted lamb and fermented grapes. But the ceramic amphorae stood empty, their dark mouths gaping. What do we really know about weddings in first-century Judea? Far from candlelit ceremonies and personal vows, these multi-day community events involved financial negotiations spanning months, public processions through villages at midnight, and family alliances that determined survival itself. We imagine brides choosing their partners, exchanging rings in intimate moments, celebrating romantic love. But 2,000 years ago, a young girl, perhaps 13 or 14, woke on her wedding day having spoken fewer than 20 words to the man who would share her sleeping mat. She had spent the previous weeks grinding grain with her mother, learning which herbs prevented infection after childbirth, memorizing the exact movements required to draw water without spilling a drop. Romance was not the question. Survival was. For centuries, we have imagined biblical weddings through the lens of modern celebration. Love declarations, personal choice, individual fulfillment. But the reality was far more complex, more communal, and in many ways more profound. Picture instead a bride who never saw her groom's face until the procession ended. Negotiations conducted entirely between fathers and village elders, a week-long feast that could bankrupt a family or establish their honor for a generation. The scent of pressed olive oil mingling with anxiety in a small stone room. These were not merely cultural differences. They were the very fabric against which Jesus wove his parables about wedding feasts, about virgins with lamps, about garments and invitations. Understanding the weight of those ceremonies, the economic pressure, the social stakes, the spiritual preparation, means that many details of the Gospels gain new and deeper meaning. Stay until the end, because what you are about to discover goes beyond historical curiosity and can strengthen our faith today. But this ceremony that consumed an entire village began not with celebration, but with calculation. Marriage in first-century Judea was fundamentally an economic transaction, and every family understood the mathematics of survival. The mohar, the bride price, was not symbolic. It represented compensation to the bride's father for losing a worker, typically equivalent to 50 shekels of silver, roughly what a laborer earned in an entire year. Fathers counted out worn coins on wooden tables, their fingers tracing calculations in the dust. The metal felt cool and heavy, each piece representing weeks of labor in fields or workshops. For poor families, this sum was staggering. Many fathers negotiated payment plans spanning years, their daughters' futures hanging on promised installments. The bride herself received the ketubah, a marriage contract written on papyrus or pottery shards, specifying exactly what she would inherit if widowed or divorced. Scribes formed Hebrew letters with reed brushes dipped in lamp-black ink, the scratching sound filling small rooms. These were not romantic gestures, but legal necessities in a society where women owned nothing independently. A typical ketubah listed items in painful detail: 2 changes of clothing, 1 cooking pot, access to a grinding stone, a portion of any olive oil produced. Rich families included jewelry, silver cups, parcels of land. Poor families listed what they could: a wooden comb, a clay jar, the right to glean in family fields. The document smelled of ink and anxiety. This was not choice, but survival engineered through alliance. Marriages united families, not individuals. A carpenter's son married a farmer's daughter to secure grain supplies. A widow's son married into a family with a fishing boat to gain access to protein. Village elders arranged matches based on practical considerations, which families held water rights, who controlled passage through valuable land, which households could provide refuge during Roman tax collection. Young people had no romantic courtship period. They observed each other at wells and in marketplaces, learning character through rumor and brief glimpses. A girl might see her future husband 3 times before the betrothal, always with family present, never alone. Their conversations, if any occurred, covered household management and family obligations, not feelings or desires. Jesus learned this economic reality from childhood, watching his mother Mary calculate what his sisters' marriages would cost, observing Joseph negotiate with other families. These experiences were not abstract. They were lessons learned in the body, the weight of silver in cupped hands, the tension in a father's voice discussing terms, the relief when agreements were reached. Later, when Jesus spoke about the kingdom of heaven being like a king who prepared a wedding feast for his son, he was not creating metaphors. He was describing the economic weight, the family honor, the community investment that every listener understood. This reveals something fundamental about how divine invitation works, not as romantic pursuit, but as covenant binding entire communities. When the betrothal was finalized, the real social machinery began moving. Betrothal, erusin in Hebrew, was legally binding, breakable only by formal divorce, yet the couple remained separated for up to a year. This was not an engagement as we understand it. The bride stayed in her father's house while the groom prepared a dwelling, usually a room built onto his father's compound. The sound of hammer on stone echoed through villages as young men shaped limestone blocks, mixed clay mortar, constructed walls that would house generations. Neighbors watched progress, calculating the groom's dedication and prosperity. A slowly built room signaled poverty or doubt. A quickly finished chamber indicated resources and commitment. During this separation, the bride underwent intensive preparation. Older women taught her responsibilities through demonstration, not discussion. She learned to grind barley into flour using a saddle quern, the upper stone wearing grooves into her palms as she pushed and pulled for hours. The grain dust coated her throat. She practiced drawing water from the village well, balancing a heavy jar on her shoulder while navigating uneven paths, the ceramic cool against her neck. She memorized recipes, how much salt preserved meat without ruining it, which wild herbs stopped bleeding, when to add fermented starter to bread dough. Wealthy girls learned to manage servants and keep household accounts, tracing figures on wax tablets. Poor girls learned which wild plants were edible in drought years, how to make 1 chicken feed 8 people, and techniques for stretching olive oil through winter months. The community invested in this process because a failed marriage destabilized the entire social network. If a wife could not manage household resources, both families suffered. If she bore no children, the economic alliance collapsed. Village women, therefore, became enforcers of competence. They tested the bride's bread, examined her weaving, observed her interactions with children. This was not cruelty, but collective survival strategy. A 15-year-old girl carried the economic futures of 2 extended families on her shoulders. The pressure was immense. Some girls thrived, discovering capabilities they had not known. Others broke under the weight, developing illnesses that delayed marriages or occasionally made them impossible. Jesus learned the power of waiting and preparation by watching these betrothal periods, seeing young men build rooms stone by stone, observing brides transformed by intensive training. These experiences were not abstract. They were lessons learned in the body, the patience required for construction, the dedication needed for mastery, the community investment in individual formation. Later, When Jesus told parables about wise and foolish virgins waiting for the bridegroom's arrival, he was not creating metaphors. He was describing the literal social structure of Jewish marriage, where the groom arrived unannounced when the room was ready, and the bride had to maintain readiness for months. This detail profoundly alters how we understand spiritual preparation, not as momentary decision, but as sustained formation within community. Beyond the economic calculations and social preparation, marriage in first-century Judea unfolded according to a rhythm completely foreign to modern experience. The wedding itself did not happen on a single afternoon, but consumed an entire week, sometimes two. Time moved differently. There was no concept of getting it over with or the big day. Instead, the ceremony stretched across days, each phase carrying distinct meanings and requiring different participants. Families saved for years to afford this extended celebration, knowing that a poorly executed wedding shamed not just the couple, but their ancestors and descendants. The festivities began with the bridegroom's procession, which occurred after sunset, sometimes near midnight. The groom gathered male relatives and friends, holding torches of oil-soaked rags wrapped around wooden poles. The flames cast moving shadows on whitewashed walls as the group walked through village streets, singing psalms and traditional songs. Their voices echoed off stone. People sleeping on rooftops woke and watched. The procession moved slowly, deliberately, allowing the entire community to witness. When they reached the bride's house, her father formally transferred her to the groom's authority. She wore multiple veils, her face completely hidden. The couple had still barely spoken. They walked together back to the groom's family compound, the torch-lit procession growing as others joined, children running alongside, women ululating. At the family home, the couple entered the bridal chamber, the room the groom had spent months building, while guests waited outside. This consummation was not private in the modern sense. The entire community needed proof of the bride's virginity. After the act, a cloth stained with blood was presented to family elders and sometimes displayed publicly. This seems barbaric to contemporary sensibilities, but in a society where a woman's entire economic value derived from her marriageability, virginity was a verifiable commodity. The cloth was kept as legal evidence. If a husband later claimed his wife had not been a virgin, this fabric could prove his lie or confirm his accusation, determining whether the woman would be supported or abandoned. Then the feast began in earnest. For 7 days, the community ate together. Families slaughtered animals they could barely afford to lose: sheep, goats, occasionally a young bull. The smell of roasting meat filled villages. Women baked hundreds of loaves. Men brought wine, often more than they should. The couple sat in positions of honor, wearing special garments while guests ate and drank. The celebration was not about the couple's happiness, but about the community's investment in their success. Every neighbor who attended brought a gift and expected future reciprocation. These exchanges created networks of obligation that lasted decades. Jesus learned the sacred importance of time and presence by experiencing these week-long celebrations, seeing how community bonds were forged, not in moments but across days, observing how celebration required sacrifice and planning. These experiences were not abstract. They were lessons learned in the body, the exhaustion of sustained festivity, the depth of relationships built through shared meals, the way time slowed and deepened when people committed to presence. Later, when Jesus spoke about wedding feasts lasting days, about virgins maintaining readiness through long waits, about garments appropriate for sustained celebration, he was not creating metaphors, he was describing the temporal reality of Jewish marriage. And it is precisely this that begins to reveal why the kingdom of heaven so often appears in wedding imagery. Because it requires the same sustained presence, the same community investment, the same long preparation. After understanding the economics, social structures, and temporal rhythms, we encounter the dimension that made these marriages more than contracts, their spiritual formation power. Every aspect of the wedding process was designed, whether consciously or through generations of practice, to transform individuals into a unified household capable of transmitting covenant faith to the next generation. This was not incidental. Jewish marriage existed to create not just families, but communities that could maintain identity under foreign occupation, preserve Torah knowledge across generations, and provide practical demonstration of God's covenant love. The betrothal period functioned as spiritual novitiate. During the months of separation, both bride and groom engaged in intensive character formation. The groom built not just a physical room, but demonstrated patience, diligence, and provision capability, qualities essential for spiritual leadership. The bride learned not just household tasks, but self-discipline, resourcefulness, and the capacity to create shalom, wholeness, and peace within domestic space. Older couples mentored younger ones, passing down not just techniques but wisdom. A mother teaching her daughter to bake bread imparted lessons about patience, about working with living processes that could not be rushed, about how small daily acts of provision expressed covenant love. These lessons were physical, tangible, but carried spiritual weight. The wedding feast itself was liturgical, though we rarely recognize it as such. The blessing spoken over wine and bread, the ritual washing the special garments, the communal witness. These were not decorative elements, but sacramental acts. The couple was not just forming a household, but participating in the ongoing creation story, becoming one flesh in an act that mirrored God's original design. The community's presence was not merely social but theological. Witnesses testified that this union aligned with covenant principles, that it contributed to Israel's continued existence, that it was good and holy. Nothing seemed extraordinary about these marriages to outside observers. Just another village wedding, another economic alliance, another week of celebration. Yet something essential was being built. Young people were learning that love was not primarily feeling, but action. Not spontaneous emotion, but deliberate faithfulness over time. They discovered that desire matured through constraint, that intimacy deepened through shared work, that romance, when it appeared, was the fruit of covenant keeping, not its foundation. Many couples grew to love each other deeply over years, their affection rooted in mutual respect and shared suffering. Others maintained partnerships of practical cooperation, which was considered successful and honorable. The goal was not personal fulfillment, but covenant faithfulness. Jesus learned that true love was covenantal by watching these marriages unfold, seeing couples who barely knew each other build lives of deep partnership, observing how commitment created the conditions for affection to grow, witnessing how shared purpose transformed strangers into intimate companions. These experiences were not abstract. They were lessons learned in the body, the transformation possible through sustained faithfulness, the way constraint could deepen rather than diminish love, the power of community support in times of difficulty. Later, when Jesus spoke about love requiring sacrifice, about denying self, about faithfulness until death, about how the greatest love lays down its life, he was not creating metaphors. He was describing the covenant logic he had observed in Jewish marriages, where love was a decision enacted daily, regardless of feeling. This reveals something fundamental about God's own covenant love, not as emotional sentimentality, but as unbreakable commitment that transforms over time. To conclude, reflect on what we have discovered. When we observe marriage in first-century Judea, we realize that these unions were simultaneously economic transactions, ensuring family survival, social structures binding communities together through obligation networks. temporal events requiring sustained presence and preparation across months or years, and spiritual formations designed to transmit covenant faithfulness to new generations. Each element was essential. Remove the economic dimension and families starved. Ignore the social aspect and communities fragmented. Rush the temporal process and couples lacked necessary preparation. Neglect the spiritual foundation, and marriages became mere contracts devoid of sacred meaning. The genius of Jewish marriage was its integration of all these dimensions into a unified system that served both practical and transcendent purposes. Jesus knew the weight of bride prices counted in worn silver coins, the anxiety in fathers' voices during negotiations, the sound of hammers shaping limestone wedding chambers, the flickering light of midnight processions, the taste of wine shared at week-long feasts, the transformation possible when strangers committed to lifelong covenant. And it was on this common ground that radical truth was prepared. When Jesus described the kingdom of heaven through wedding imagery, his listeners heard not romantic metaphors but structural reality. The economic costliness of inclusion, the social investment required, the long preparation period, the community celebration, the covenant binding. Understanding this daily life changes the way we read the Gospels. Suddenly, parables about wedding garments carry implications about preparedness and honor. Stories about wise virgins maintaining oil supplies become lessons in sustained faithfulness. Descriptions of kings preparing feasts for their sons reveal the economic sacrifice inherent in divine invitation. God acts in the invisible, in the simple, in what seems small. The method has not changed. Just as covenant love was formed not in romantic moments but through daily acts of provision and faithfulness, so spiritual transformation occurs not primarily in dramatic experiences, but in consistent obedience over time. The wedding chamber, built stone by stone, reflects the character formed choice by choice. The bride trained through months of practice demonstrates the disciple shaped through years of following. The community that invested in each marriage prefigures the church that supports each member's formation. This calls us to reflection. Are we approaching faith as momentary decision or sustained covenant? Do we expect transformation through dramatic experience or daily faithfulness? Are we building our spiritual lives with the patience of a first-century groom constructing a wedding chamber, or do we demand instant results? And if this documentary strengthened your faith and expanded your understanding of how God works through ordinary human structures to accomplish extraordinary purposes, leave your like. Comment on what you found most interesting about these ancient wedding practices, and share this video with someone who would benefit from seeing Scripture through fresh historical eyes. Your support helps carry this story forward, connecting ancient wisdom with contemporary faith. Until the next video, may you recognize the sacred in the everyday, the eternal in the temporal, the divine covenant hidden in human commitment.